If you have ever thought that a person shows their true face in the hardest moment, you're right. Mine showed his. I was giving birth to our first child and he chose a plane. And what happened the next morning, he will never forget. My name is Sienna Walsh. I'm 31 years old, and I want to tell you about the night my marriage ended, even though the divorce papers wouldn't come for months. Because the marriage didn't end in a courtroom. It ended in a hospital hallway at 3 in the morning, with a nurse holding my hand because the person who was supposed to be there had decided that a vacation mattered more. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the big ending only makes sense if you understand how quietly it all built up. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was charming in the way that men are charming when they have never once had to wonder whether someone loves them. People gravitated toward him. His mother adored him. His father bragged about him. And for a while, I thought that warmth would eventually extend to me. I thought marrying into a close family meant I was joining something. I didn't understand yet that some families don't have room for a new member. They have room for an audience. The first sign came small, the way these things always do. We'd been married 8 months when his mother, Carol, started calling me by the wrong name in front of guests. Not maliciously, she'd insist, just a slip. She would say Rebecca, the name of Daniel's ex-girlfriend, and then laugh and touch my arm and say, "Oh, I'm hopeless with names." But she never once got Daniel's name wrong. She never got his father's name wrong. She got mine wrong, again and again, for 2 years, until I stopped correcting her because correcting her made me the difficult one. That's the thing about families like Daniel's. They have a quiet system, and the system runs on one rule. The person who notices the unfairness is the problem, not the unfairness itself. I want to be honest with you. For a long time, I played along. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself that keeping the peace was a kind of strength. When Carol planned every holiday at her house and never once asked what I wanted, I said it was fine. When Daniel's father, Ronald, made jokes about how I trapped Daniel by getting pregnant, even though we had planned this baby together for over a year. I laughed too, because laughing was easier than the silence that followed if I didn't. And Daniel watched all of it. That's what I need you to understand. He wasn't a villain twirling a mustache. He was worse in a way. He was a man who saw exactly what was happening and decided every single time that it was easier to let me absorb it than to defend me. He chose comfort over me so many times that by the end, choosing the plane over the hospital wasn't even a dramatic break from who he was. It was just the loudest version of something he had been doing quietly for years. I think about that a lot now, the way contempt can hide inside what looks like affection. Carol never raised her voice at me. She never said a single thing you could write down and point to and say, "There, that's cruelty." It was all in the spaces between words. The way she had served everyone at the table and then look up surprised and say, "Oh, Sienna, did you want some too?" The way she had asked Daniel's opinion on the nursery, the baby's name, the pediatrician, every decision about my own body and my own child. While I sat right there, she built a whole architecture of small exclusions, and because no single brick was heavy, I kept telling myself the building wasn't real. And the worst part wasn't even Carol. The worst part was the slow understanding that Daniel agreed with her. Not loudly. He'd never say, "My mother's right about you." But he'd go quiet when she did it. He'd change the subject. He'd tell me later in the car, "You are reading too much into it. She means well." That phrase, "she means well," became the wallpaper of my marriage. It papered over everything. It made my own eyes the problem instead of the thing my eyes were seeing. There was a moment, about 4 months into the pregnancy, that I should have recognized as the real warning. We were at Carol's house, and she announced that she had already chosen the baby's middle name, not suggested, chosen. She wanted to be Carol, after herself, and she told her friends already. When I gently said that we hadn't decided yet, that we wanted to choose our daughter's name ourselves, Carol got very quiet, set down her fork, and said, "Well, I suppose I'm not really part of this family anymore." And the entire table turned to look at me, as if I had done something. And Daniel, my husband, reached over and put his hand on his mother's hand and said, "Mom, of course you are." He comforted her for the crime of my wanting to name my own child. Nobody comforted me. I sat there pregnant and outnumbered and learned one more time where I ranked. Now here's where it turns, because this isn't a story about a woman who got walked on. This is a story about the morning everything changed, and about the one thing none of them knew I had. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. My doctor flagged me as high risk early on, which meant more appointments, more monitoring, more careful planning. Daniel came to exactly two of those appointments in 9 months. The first one he spent on his phone. The second one he left early to meet his father for lunch. I sat in that room alone, looking at the grainy image of our daughter on the screen and the technician, a woman named Priya, who would never forget, looked at me with this soft expression and said, "Is someone coming to be with you?" And I said, "No." And she stayed an extra 20 minutes just talking to me about nothing, about the weather, about her own kids, so I wouldn't have to sit there alone. Strangers kept showing up for me in the moments my own had been wounded. I didn't realize at the time that I was keeping a record of that, but somewhere inside me, the receipts were stacking up. About 6 weeks before my due date, Carol announced at a family dinner that she and Ronald were taking a long awaited trip. 2 weeks in Portugal in Spain. She had been planning it for half a year, she said, and the timing was just perfect because the weather would be lovely. Daniel's sister Megan clapped her hands and said how wonderful it was that they finally got to do something for themselves. I remember sitting at the table with my hand on my stomach doing the math. 2 weeks in Portugal. My due date fell directly in the middle of those 2 weeks, and I waited. I actually waited for anyone to mention it, to say, "Oh, but the baby's coming then." Nobody did. The conversation moved on to the hotels and flights and which restaurants Carol had bookmarked. That night, in the car, I said it out loud. I said, "Daniel, your mom's trip is right around when the baby's due." And he said, "I know, it'll probably be fine. First babies are always late anyway." I told myself that meant he wasn't going. I told myself there was no version of reality where my husband flew to another continent while I was due to give birth to our first child. I was so sure of it that I didn't even argue. Looking back, that's the part that still catches in my throat. I trust him to do the most basic a partner does, and I was wrong. 2 days before Carol and Ronald were set to leave, I went into early labor. It was sudden. My water broke in the kitchen at 9 in the evening, 3 weeks before my due date. I called Daniel, who was, of all places, at his parents' house helping them pack. I told him it was happening, that we needed to go to the hospital. There was a pause on the line, and then he said, "Are you sure? Like, sure, sure?" I will never forget that question. "Are you sure?" As if I might be making it up. As if amniotic fluid on my kitchen floor was a thing a person could be confused about. He came home, drove me to the hospital, and for the first few hours he was actually there. I want to be fair. He held my hand during the early contractions. He looked nervous and out of his depth, but he was present. And for a little while, I let myself believe that this finally would be the moment he showed up for me. Then his phone rang. It was Carol. He stepped into the hallway to take it. I could hear pieces through the door. I heard him say, "No, Mom, it's fine." I heard him say, "She's only just started." I heard him say, "The flight's non-refundable, I know." And then I heard the thing that broke something in me permanently. I heard him laugh. He came back in and sat down and didn't say anything for a while. Around 2 in the morning, the contractions were getting stronger and farther apart in the frustrating early labor way. And the nurse explained it could still be many hours, possibly into the next day. Daniel's whole body changed when he heard that. He sat up straighter, he pulled out his phone, and then he said the sentence I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, Sienna, if it's going to be hours anyway, my parents' flight is at 6. I shall drive them to the airport and see them off. It's been planned for months. I will come right back. I thought I'd misheard him. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, slower, as if I were being unreasonable for not understanding the first time. He explained that his mother would be devastated if no one saw them off. He explained that I was in good hands, that the nurses were professionals, that he'd have his phone on the whole time. He explained and explained, and the more he explained, the calmer he got, and the more I understood that he had already decided. The conversation wasn't a request, it was a notification. He kissed my forehead, he told me to call him if anything changed, and he walked out of that hospital room to drive his parents to the airport while I was in labor with his child. The door closed, and the room was very, very quiet. Now I want to pause here because I know that some of you are thinking, why didn't I scream? Why didn't I call everyone I knew? Why didn't I make a scene? And the answer is something I have only understood since. When you have spent years being trained that noticing the unfairness makes you the problem, you go quiet. You don't scream, you absorb. I lay in that bed and I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just looked at the ceiling and I felt something settle in me that I had never felt before. Not anger exactly. Clarity. Cold, clean clarity. Like a window that had been fogged for years suddenly wiped clean. The nurse he had been checking on me, her name was Diane. I came back in around 3. She saw the empty chair. She saw my face. And she didn't say anything sappy. She just pulled the chair closer, sat down, took my hand and said, I've got you, honey. We are going to do this together. A stranger, a woman I had known for 5 hours. She held my hand through the next set of contractions while my husband stood in the airport hugging his mother goodbye. If this is hitting close to home for you, take a breath. I know these stories are hard. Stay with me, because what happened next is the part that matters. My daughter was born at 7:42 in the morning. Her name is Ada. She came into the world screaming, healthy, perfect, with a full head of dark hair and the loudest little voice I had ever heard. Diane placed her on my chest, and in that moment, every single thing that had been confusing about my life became simple. I looked at his tiny person and I understood with total certainty that I would never again let anyone treat me the way Danielle's family had taught me to accept being treated. Not because I was angry, because she was watching, even if she couldn't see it. She would learn how to be treated by watching how I let myself be treated. Danielle showed up at 8:30. He walked in with a coffee in his hand and sheepish smile, and he said, Oh wow, you already had her? I told you first babies come fast. As if he had predicted it, as if his absence had been a clever scheduling decision rather than an abandonment. He reached for Ada, and I let him hold her because she was his daughter too. And I'm not the kind of person who uses a baby as a weapon. But while he held her, he made a phone call. He put it on speaker, propped against his shoulder, and he called his mother, who was sitting at the departure gate. And he said, Mom, she's here. The baby's here. She's beautiful. And I heard Carol's voice come through, tiny and bright. And the first thing she said, the very first thing, and was not congratulations or is Sienna okay? The first thing Carol said was, Oh, good. So it all worked out and you didn't miss our flight after all. It all worked out. And here's the thing they didn't know. Here's the one thing none of them ever bothered to learn about me, because in their version of the story, I was just the audience. I want to take a quick pause here because so many of you have asked me how I document things, how I keep records, how I stay calm enough to think clearly when everything's falling apart. I put together a free guide on exactly that, on how to protect yourself, your finances, and your peace when you're dealing with people who don't respect you. It's completely free and you can grab it through the link in the description and the pinned comment below. If this story is resonating with you, that guide is for you. Now, back to the one thing they never learned about me. Before I met Daniel, before any of this, I built something. In my 20s, I had started a small business, a specialty bakery. And over the years, it had grown into something far bigger than I ever let his family see. I learned early in our relationship that the moment Daniel's family found out you had money, they found out they needed it. So I kept it quiet. Daniel knew I owned a little bakery. He had no idea it had become a regional operation with three locations in the wholesale contract that supplied half the cafes in our city. He never asked. He genuinely never asked what I did all day. In his mind, I was a wife who pottered around with cupcakes. The house we lived in, the nice one his mother loved to host gatherings in and treat like her own, the one Ronald liked to say Daniel had provided for us. I had bought it outright, in my name only, on the advice of an accountant who had told me years early, Sienna, never put a man's name on an asset he didn't earn. I laughed at the time. I wasn't laughing now. While I was on maternity leave in those first quiet weeks with Ada, I had a lot of time to think, and I did something I should have done years earlier. I called that accountant, and then I called the family lawyer, not in a rage, not as revenge in the cartoon sense. I called them the way you call a contractor when you finally accept that the foundation is cracked and pretending otherwise will only let the whole house collapse on the people you love. The lawyer asked me to walk her through everything, the house, the business, the prenup Daniel and I had signed, the one his mother had insisted on because she had been worried about gold diggers. Not realizing the gold digger she should have worried about was sitting at her own dinner table. That prenup, the one designed to protect Daniel's family from me, protect every single thing I had built before the marriage and kept it entirely mine. Carol had handed me this sword herself years ago and never once imagined I'd be the one holding it. Here's what I did, and I want to be precise because the satisfying part isn't drama, it's order. I didn't blow up, I didn't post anything online, I didn't confront Carol at a dinner. Instead, I waited until Daniel's parents got back from Portugal. 2 weeks of them sending photos of beaches and tapas while I learned to breastfeed alone at 3 in the morning. I waited until the whole family gathered at my house, the house they thought was Daniel's, for a welcome the baby lunch that Carol had organized without asking me in my own home. And at that lunch, after everyone had eaten, after Carol had held Ada and announced to them room that the babies definitely had the family nose, I stood up, I had a folder, and I said very calmly, I have a few things to share. I told them plainly that the house we were sitting in was mine, purchased before the marriage, in my name alone. I watched Ronald's face do something complicated. I told them about the business, the real scope of it, in 3 locations, the wholesale contracts. I watched Carol's smile freeze, and then I told them the part that mattered. I told Daniel that I had filed for divorce, that the prenup his own mother had insisted on protected everything I had built, and that he would be moving out my house by the end of the month. The room exploded, of course. Carol called me cold. Ronald called me calculating. Megan called me a liar until I slid the deed across the table. And Daniel, my husband, the man who had driven his parents to an airport while I labored, looked at me and said the most revealing thing he could have said. He didn't say sorry. He said, how long have you been hiding all this from me? Hiding? As if telling the truth about what's mine is a betrayal, but driving away from your laboring wife is just logistics? I looked at him, and I looked at our daughter sleeping in Carol's arms, and I said the only thing that needed saying. I said, I wasn't hiding it, Daniel. You just never once asked who I was. If this part landed for you, you already know how it feels to be invisible to the people who are supposed to see you first. And I want you to hear this clearly. Noticing that is not coldness. Wanting to be treated like a person is not calculating. The people who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries cruelty. Don't let them rename your self-respect. The months after that were not clean or easy. I won't pretend they were. Divorce is paperwork and exhaustion and 1,000 small griefs about a future you thought you had half. But the prenup held. The house stayed mine, the business stayed mine. Daniel moved out, and Carol stopped calling me the wrong name because she stopped calling me at all, which frankly was its own kind of gift. Daniel fought for shared custody, and I didn't fight that part because Ada deserves a father, even an imperfect one, and I am not interested in teaching her that love is a punishment you withhold. But I made one thing permanent and unmovable. I sat down with my lawyer and set up a trust for Ada, funded entirely from the business with terms that no future husband, no member of Daniel's family can ever touch. The same protection my accountant once gave me, I have now given my daughter, locked in before she can even say my name. Carol found out about the trust eventually through Daniel, and she had the audacity to call me and ask whether the family will be included in Ada's future. I want you to sit with that. The woman who couldn't remember my name for 2 years, who skipped her grandchild's birth for a bitch, calling to ask whether she had been included. I told her the truth, calmly, the way I had learned to tell the truth now. I said, Carol, you taught me something important. You taught me that the people who plan their trips around their own comfort don't get to plan their place in someone else's family. Ada will know you if you earn it, but you will never again get to decide what you have your own. And then I hung up, not slammed the phone, just set it down, gently, the way you set down something you no longer need to hold. A few months after everything settled, I was at one of my bakeries early in the morning before the doors opened, with Ada sleeping a carrier against my chest. The smell of bread was filling the room, the ovens were warm, and one of my longtime employees, a woman named Rosa, who had been with me since the first location, looked over and said, You seem different lately, lighter. And I realized she was right. I hadn't felt lighter because anything dramatic had happened. I felt lighter because I had stopped carrying something I was never meant to carry, the weight of making myself small enough to be welcome in a place that was never going to make room for me. You don't notice how heavy that is until you set it down. Daniel texts sometimes, mostly about the custody schedule, occasionally with something that sounds almost like an apology but never quite gets there. I didn't realize how it looked, he wrote once. How it looked, not how it was. Even now, his concern is for the optics of his choices, not the choices themselves. I respond politely. I keep it about Ada, and I no longer expect him to understand. Some people never do, and waiting for their understanding is just another way of waiting for permission to matter. The people who treat you as the audience in your own life are counting on one thing. They're counting on you staying quiet because quiet is comfortable, and because they have trained you to believe that the moment you speak up, you become the villain. But noticing the truth is not villainy. Protecting yourself and your child is not cruelty. And the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding the deed, the prenup, the trust, and the clear, clean clarity that comes the moment you finally stop asking for permission to matter. Daniel chose a plane. I choose my daughter, my peace, and a future where the word difficult stopped being an insult and started being a description for a woman who simply refused to disappear. If this story meant something to you, take a second and gently tap that like button. It gently helps the story reach the people who need to hear them. The ones lying awake right now, wondering if they are the difficult one, you are not. You are just awake. And if you want to hear what happened the first time someone in this family to try to take something that was mine, the story of how my own parents handed my college fund to my brother and what I found in the paper trail, I made a video on that one and you can watch it right here. I will see you in the next one.